We sometimes hear stories of hardened criminals dying in prison with no remorse for their crimes. Every so often, however, we hear of miraculous stories of a remarkable turnaround. We have one of those for you today. Today's guest joins me now from Burbank, California, is Casey Diaz, author of The Shotcaller, My Life as a Latino Gangbanger. Casey, welcome to Bridge City News.
Thank you so much for having me.
Now, you have an interesting story to share. You lived in a rough part of LA, grew up in a very broken family environment. Can you tell me a bit about that?
We settled into California in what's called the Rampart District of Los Angeles. It's about 3-4 miles away from downtown LA. And, at first, very normal things, playing baseball outside, football, and, just a normal life growing up in LA. But there was something of a bad element inside of our home, and it had to do with my father being a heavy drinker and very abusive, very violent abuser with my mom, and both verbally and physically as well.
Now, you said your father actually had a complete hatred towards you. Is that what I hear? And why is that? And what effect did that actually have on you as a boy?
Well, it's, and I don't know why. I mean, I have a son that's 10 years old, and when I look at him, my heart just swells with pride having a son. But for him, in his defense, I mean, he saw both of his parents executed in El Salvador, and I think that had a lot to do with him going to the bottle and making some poor choices in life that affected his family as well.
Now, you had the misfortune to actually witness a gangland execution as a kid. How old were you at the time, and how much of an impact did that really have on you?
I was 8 years old, and we lived in, like I said, in the Rampart District, and I just happened to be at a fire escape. Those old buildings in LA, they're very similar to the ones in New York. And I was on the 3rd floor, sitting on the fire escape, dangling my feet there, and this guy drives this car, parks it, and just like he was about to go get something to drink from his refrigerator, just walks to 3 guys coming up an alley, and he executes all 3 of them. And I was 8 years old.
How scarring was that for you?
Well, it's not it's not something that any boy is ready to watch or look at. And the surprising thing for me was, as an adult looking back at that day, was that I just sat there. It scared me, but not really. I didn't run. I stayed there until he actually finished the job and walked up to his car and just simply drove off. There was no screeching of tires. There was no hurry on his end. And I just sat there and watched these men die.
Was he ever caught, and was he ever charged?
I don't know. I was 8. I was never interviewed by the police or anything like that. I never said a word.
So, Casey, you joined a gang at the tender age of 11. What was the attraction to a gang?
I think the false sense of family, of being wanted, liked, validation. And I think for every young man, whether it's a little girl or a little boy, there's certain figures in your family, in your life, that you look up to, and if that element is missing, it comes by other ways. And for me, it was a street gang.
So I guess the street gang members as well, they said to you, "We love you. We're your new family now. We'll take care of you."
And maybe not in those exact words, but pretty much so. They embrace me. You feel wanted. You feel like they're picking you up and they're taking you to parties. They're hanging out with you. A lot of time is being spent with you, and those things start to you think that it's innocent at that time, but little do you know that it has a lot of evil, a lot of darkness, and you're going to contribute to a whole life of crime.
Now, you rose up through the ranks of the gang pretty quickly, and you got involved in a lot of violence, eventually ended up in prison for second-degree murder at the age of 16. How scary was that for a 16-year-old?
By that time, I already had seen so much violence, both in the house, in the apartment, and out on the street. My first stabbing, as we talk about the book here, my first stabbing was at 11 years old. That was the first time I ever harmed somebody with a screwdriver. And so those things are, you start doing that repetitively and it becomes a habit. It's just like anything. So at 16, I was involved in a gang murder where another gang leader from a rival gang was, I ended up killing him.
So what was life like for you in prison, especially once you got sent to Folsom Prison, I mean, the one that Johnny Cash sang about?
Yeah, well, Johnny Cash was actually at Old Folsom, and that's a minimum security prison. And so New Folsom is on the same road, on Repressor Road, but it's all the way up the hill, and that's where I ended up landing. I landed at, and I was sentenced. When I got there, the CDC, the California Department of Corrections, has a scoring system of 1 to 100, and that's how what they use to evaluate how much security that is needed for each individual inmate. And so for me, I went up there with 97 points, and I was supposed to spend my entire sentence in what's called the SHU program in solitary.
Now, the title of your book is called The Shotcaller. Can you explain exactly what that means?
A shotcaller is basically a leader, someone that is very high in rank. Those titles are given usually in either in the state penitentiaries in California, or while you're actually sitting in what's called the gang module in LA County Jail. And I know that a lot has changed since then, but the gang module was where they housed the worst of the worst. This was every leader of a Southern California gang was housed, and that's where I was placed at, and that is actually where I ended up getting a title.
How did you end up in solitary confinement, and how much did that really impact you?
So I ended up there at New Folsom in the SHU program, where they house you 23 hours out of the day. You're allowed 1 hour out for rec time, which is basically they're transporting you from one 8x10 cell to a bigger cell. That's really what your rec time is. But I think that if you don't have a strong mind to begin with, solitary confinement will absolutely break the best of them. And I've seen men that, they're 6'3" and 18-inch arms cry and want to commit suicide in there. It becomes, you start hearing voices. There's so much that goes on in solitary confinement. And here's the thing, everyone that's in solitary confinement in these state prisons in California, they belong there. I belong there. And as some might say it's inhumane, you're in the SHU program because you belong in the SHU program. And, as an adult, I see that as a believer. There is a place for that. And when our behavior is out of control and we're harming people, the SHU program is adequate for that type of character.
So how long were you actually in solitary confinement?
3.5 years.
Wow. So they didn't let you out at all? I mean...
1 hour a day.
1 hour a day. Oh, my word. Wow. But at some point while you were in solitary confinement, you had a visitor? What did she say to you?
Well, there was this Bible study group that came in once a month, and they only came in for a few minutes. They didn't spend hours there. And basically, they would talk to you, do a Bible study with you. And a lady by the name of Frances Proctor, she's the one that came in and with a group there. And initially, she never bothered stopping at my cell. And on one particular occasion, she just asked the guard, is that a cell down there? Is there an inmate there? And the guard actually discouraged her. And I didn't know that they were talking about me, by the way. It was outside of the cell. And then she was very persistent in asking if she could approach the cell. And he was discouraging her quite a bit. And then finally, her persistence paid off. She told this guard, and very boldly, and I remember hearing this, she said, Jesus came for everyone, including whoever's in there. And that's when the guard, the CO said, well, you go ahead and approach the cell, but I'm letting you know that that's Diaz and you're wasting your time.
And you had an unusual supernatural encounter that took place in your cell. Tell me a bit about that.
It's this lady, Frances, decided that she was going to intercede for my life in prayer, and she did so for 1 year and 6 months. she just gave herself to prayer, and I don't know if she fasted. I never bothered asking, but I know that she was praying for me, and it was in one of those moments while I was there by myself. I'm not under the influence of anything, and I get to see something, my whole life being played back from when I was, as far as I could remember, from the innocent days of childhood to some very graphic moments that only I would know, play right in front of me, just like a movie. And I never knew how to pray. Never had a Bible. Never read a Bible. Never went to church. And all that Frances would come to do is, for 2 to 4 minutes, is, she would chat with me, and then she would pray, and she would always, tell me. She would always say to me, "I'm praying for you, and Jesus is going to use you." And she would never leave. Every time she came to visit me, for those 2 to 4 minutes, once a month, she would always end her little routine thing with, "I'm praying for you, and Jesus is going to use you." And I kind of dismissed that, and didn't pay too much attention to that. But that's really, intercessory is what got me to my knees in that moment. So it was through intercessory prayer that that really changed my life. I didn't know it. I wasn't looking for any type of change at all. I was okay with who I was, and as a gang leader there, as a shot caller. And but I think that when God, when you encounter Christ, there's a decision that has to be made. And for me, I knew that this was God calling me. I didn't know him, but I just knew that this was God reaching out to me. And I knelt in the middle of that cell. I wept because I knew that it wasn't that, and I don't know how to explain this, but I go into details in the book. The Shot Caller, someone that doesn't know how to pray, somebody that doesn't know God, that's not even looking for him. Isaiah 65:1 gives us a very good picture of what God does to people that aren't even looking for him. And in Isaiah, he says, to the ones that aren't looking for me, to them I say, "Here I am." And that's the experience that I had in that cell. And I repented, and I gave my life to the Lord unknowingly. I go into details about that as well later on in the book.
Now, Casey, after your transformation, you were released back into the general prison population. How did you handle this, and did you keep your faith to yourself privately, or did you share it with a lot of the other inmates?
No, God started to deal with me while I was still in the SHU, and I didn't know that I was going to get released out of the SHU at the time that I did. God had a way of doing that, and here's what was in my heart. For many years, since the age of 11, I had absolutely no problem and no shame in proclaiming my gang and parading it. And here I am as a Christian at that point. And that same attitude was inside of me, and I wasn't going to go. I was just going to declare his name to everyone, and it got me a lot of beatings in prison. I mean, multiple beatings in prisons for doing so. But you read the Book of Acts, and it just charges you up, and you see that, and if it was God's will to in my life at that moment, and that was it, I was willing to do that. But the beatings were for a 2-year period while I was in there, and in mainline. And after that, a big giant riot happened there, in which all the ones that were attacking me for those 2 years were dispersed throughout other prisons. And then evangelism really began. By the time I ended up leaving New Folsom, over 200 inmates would become born again.
Wow, that's amazing. Casey, we only have about 30 seconds left here. Explain to our viewers how you were released from prison, how much time you spent in there.
So I spent almost 8 years there complete. The story, I wasn't born in the United States. Came here when I was 2. But there was federal agents waiting for me outside of the gate of this prison. And you got to get the book to really look at what happened in there. But God's mercy and His grace is how I live and what's carried me for over 20-something years since my release from New Folsom.
Casey Diaz, author of The Shotcaller, My Life as a Latino Gangbanger. Thanks for joining me today.
Thank you so much for having me on your show. God bless you.
God bless you as well. On behalf of all of us here at PCN, I'm Hal Roberts. Have a great night.